My guest today is Francis Freidman, president of Time and Place Strategies Consultant, one of the leading experts on the meetings, conventions, and exhibit and trade show industry in the world. So, Francis, we're delighted to have you back. Thank you.
Well, I'm happy to be back. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. The last time we spoke about some of the do's and don'ts of the advantages and disadvantages of trade shows. Tell me, what are some of the most glaring errors and faux pas that people make?
You're touching on a sensitive area here.
Well, no names.
No names,
No
of
names.
course. Of course. Yeah. Not bringing the right people to the booth might seem simple, but if you don't speak the language and you haven't brought somebody who speaks the language, you're in essence deaf and dumb at a trade show.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Yes. Or, in many cases, there are differences in the language that says to the people who are at that show, you're from the north of our country, but this is the south of the country. We know, for example, that there are different constructs in Spanish. So if you're in Spain, you're going to be speaking Castilian Spanish. If you're in Puerto Rico, you're going to be speaking that type of Spanish. And each of the Spanish-speaking countries, as we move to South America, have their own unique idiomatic nuances to the language.
I learned that one the hard way when I wrote my book. And fortunately, I had somebody edit the Spanish part of, when we were talking about menus, and when I wrote Eddie's professionally many years ago. And apparently there were some things that I put in there that were slang in some parts of the world that were not totally appropriate.
Exactly. So. You raise another point also, which is the specific words that you use.
Yes.
We need to be very careful about those words, because in some part of the country it may be appropriate, and in other parts of the country it may not.
It strikes me that the other thing in bringing in the right people is their behavior.
Absolutely, absolutely. There are certain gestures and certain hand things that get done that send the wrong signal if you're not careful.
Well, and also you mentioned using the right words before. One of the things that happens, of course, is that there are different ways to speak according to the hierarchy of the person that you're dealing with in a certain country.
Absolutely.
I mean, there are different levels of conversation in Japan, for instance, that if you don't address them properly, you can get yourself into something.
Exactly. Hierarchy is also very interesting also, because you may find initially you will be approached in a booth by a low-level person. And in the United States, unfortunately, and sometimes, booth people will blow them off because they don't have the right title on their badge. Internationally, however, senior executive will send a junior-level executive to gather information. So it's important for booth people to recognize that whoever comes into the booth is there for a purpose. And they need to be treated with respect. They need to be, not necessarily kowtowed to, but they do need to be treated with respect and taken seriously. Especially a junior executive. Many times, if you're an English speaker, a senior executive in a foreign country that may not necessarily speak English will send a junior executive who may have been educated in the United States or who has taken English to come into the booth to establish a certain relationship with you. Matter of fact, I had that happen in Japan. I had 3 visits from junior executives in the United States. Then when I went to Japan, they introduced me to the senior executives who didn't speak English well. They preferred to speak in Japanese with the translation through the junior executive. But after the 3rd visit domestically, I had been proven okay, if you will, to then have in Tokyo a meeting with the senior executives where we essentially just went out for a meal to continue to establish a relationship with each other. And a small amount of business was discussed at that meal.
It's always very small when you're dealing with Japan.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And
Absolutely.
also in many countries, in Germany, for instance, well. I know, too, when we used to do trade shows in Japan, one of the things that would happen, of course, is the junior level people would come in and they would gather the information, and then everybody would go a little ways out of hearing range, and they would all caucus with the more senior people. And then they'd come back into the booth and get more information, go back outside, stand there in their little circle and caucus.
Exactly. The same thing happened in reverse with the Italians. They sent people over, and then when they sent their delegation to the United States, I had 30 Italians go, Senor Friedman. Very enthusiastic. And they are very enthusiastic. That's the other thing. You have a difference in enthusiasm between many of the southern countries who are very enthusiastic and passionate. They're jumping up and down as you watch in a soccer game. And northern executives who are a little more reserved.
Of course.
Go to Finland, they're much more reserved.
And one of the things, of course, that happens is that if you don't understand what's going on because you haven't done any cultural preparation, then you get really discombobulated. I mean, what's going on here? What are these people doing? it's really nerve-wracking and unnerving, really, in some ways.
Sure, and you may respond as you would in the United States by putting out your hand to shake hands in a country that doesn't shake hands. The whole culture of bowing and how to bow and when to bow and all of that, and how to handle your business card. In Asia, as you well know, business card is presented to them this way, so that they can read the business card.
With both hands.
With both hands. And then you take their business card and you look at it and study it with both hands.
And you take the time to study it.
Exactly.
Yes, exactly. So what are some of the other glaring faux pas you've seen or heard?
You're not prepared to do business. You end up in a show overseas thinking that it's going to be the window, and you have no distribution. You have no pricing sheets. You haven't studied, particularly for food products and other types of pharmaceuticals, you haven't studied the labeling laws in that country, so that how your product is labeled, how it's packaged, package seals, boxing, and all the rest of that, don't conform to what's going on in that particular country. Even though the EU has many common standards, there may be nuances in that particular category that you need to take care of for a specific country.
Also, just something as simple as our neighbors up north in Canada, things have to be bilingual in the label.
Exactly.
And one of the other things I've noticed too is so often that people don't have their business cards well translated on the other side.
Exactly.
Or have a business card that is in that culture's language. And also, that's something that you have to get vetted by somebody who really speaks the language well to make sure it's done appropriately.
Exactly. Multi-language brochures.
Yes.
French, German, Italian, and then maybe Japanese or Chinese, even if you're doing a show in Europe, because those countries are traveling all over looking for products.
And again, people don't think of doing the multicultural, multi-language brochure. They think, well, we're going to Germany, we'll put some German in there or whatever.
Exactly.
Most Germans speak English anyways, we don't even need to do that.
Exactly. Here's a tip for you. Most major shows in the United States that sell internationally will have an international division, and they will do brochures in multi-languages.
That's fabulous to know.
Absolutely.
And that's
so that
really
if you're an
tip.
exhibitor in a U.S. show, you may want to have an ad in the international marketing materials that are going out for that show, so that people that are looking to find you will know that they can come to your booth. Most major U.S. shows also have an international center that is staffed with people who will translate languages. My clients, for example, have international centers there where they're staffed with language specialists who can speak most of the major languages. So it's an opportunity to sort of get in the back door through that way.
What other tips would you give people as far as preparing, other than, of course, coming to use my services?
They should hire you immediately, exactly.
Of course, but no, other than that, I mean, really, executives, for, say, a company on a budget, what would you say that they should do to prepare themselves to go? What can they do?